Hello everybody, this is Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and in this training video we are continuing to talk about the RKT Field bundle. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the RKT Noise. So in this one, we are going to be using a field driver tag on this cute little robot. I made this guy a while ago and never did anything with him. I don't think I've even shown him off publicly, really. So I spent a lot of time on him, put lots of details in, but never did anything quite with him. So anyway, he's going to help us out in this video because we're going to be using noise to make his head glitch all over the place. So let's begin by right-clicking on the head and adding an extension field driver. And now that the field driver is applied, you see I actually made a mistake. This made a RKT timer. Instead, I'll hit undo. And when I right-click and add an extensions field driver, I hold down Alt. And when I do that, instead of making a timer, it makes a RKT noise. That goes to show you how important this one is, that I built it as the alternate functionality directly into the tool. Now, what do we want to control here? I would like to control, I'm thinking, the rotation. As soon as I click that, you're going to see that the head is going to rotate. By default, the default values that the field driver takes on is its natural rotation, which is 90, and 1/4 of it for the min. But instead, I'm going to set this to like 45, copy it down, mirror it to the left, and now he's got a bunch of different values, and as you see, his head is randomly pointing in a direction. If I hit play, we're going to see the head start very nicely and smoothly moving around. And that is all thanks to the RKT Noise. This is, of course, using the amazing C4D Noise collection, and we can use that to directly drive the motion. But this field was directly designed to work really, really nicely with the field driver. Now, obviously, we have inside of Cinema, we got things like the random field, and I'll actually make that to show you. If I make a random field and say, don't worry about the color, just override everything, you see that right away it's playing, but the head's not moving. And that's because by default, the random field doesn't have any animation speed. So we actually have to turn that up. And now you see that the head is like tilting at this kind of 45-degree angle. It's not randomly moving around. And that's because the Cinema 4D noise is only sampling it's sampling X, Y, and Z all at the same place unless you turn on randomized sample positions. And now it's going to start behaving a little bit like the one that we have, and you do have these different noises and whatnot. But I wanted to simplify it and make it work really nicely by default with our tool. So let's delete the random field and continue working with just our random noise here. Clicking directly on that random field, we'll see the settings, and you see nice and clean and simple. But there's a couple really important settings here that are going to be really important for some fun that we're going to have. So by default, our first setting is just this purlin noise. We can change this to any other noise type. You got all the amazing Cinema 4D noises. We can change it to something a little bit bumpier like a knocky, so it's still moving around, but you get this extra layer of jitter. But to keep things simple, for now, we're just going to stick with purlin noise. Next up, we can do different random seeds, choose any different seed we want, and it's just going to stick around at that new one forever. And this is all time dependent. So if I jump to a particular time and I keep on jumping back, you're going to see that it's always exactly the same. It's perfectly deterministic based on the time. Next up, we have the speed, which is just how fast it will move. I can pull this way down. You see it's very slowly moving, and it's unclamped. So we can push this really high, and now the head's going to be moving quick. We can go even higher, and now he's jittering around all super crazy. Not unlike what I'm going to want to go for eventually, but just something a little bit more controlled. Right-clicking back to default. Next setting is our loop period. I'll drop this down to 90 frames, which would be your normal default, and change the loop period to 91. You always want this value to be one higher than your timeline. And now you can watch as it crosses across the 90 frames back to 0. You see it's perfectly smooth. We get a perfectly looping animation by doing that. So love to be able to do that. And I can right-click to go back to 0. And 0 loop period means like infinite. It doesn't loop. Next up is time offset, where you can say, hey, the time is going to start a little bit extra forward in time or backward in time. And then we've got a override time, which we'll definitely do a demo of in maybe the quick start, because that's really powerful. This means we can control time by going forwards and backwards, where the noise is actually viewing time through this. So we can use like a RKT timer to make it go forward and backward and forward and backward, or progress based on a beat. There's a lot of different cool things we can do by overriding the time in something like a noise. Next up, we have a checkbox called Uniform. It's kind of the opposite of what the Maxon Random does, in that I can say, hey, instead of calculating each one independently, have them all be the same. And now you see that all three values, you see all three little tick marks in our gizmo are doing the exact same motion. Turn that off, and they are all different. So that's rotating around quite nicely. Next up, we have a range. So by default, it's 0 to 100, but we can also say, actually, it's going to be negative 100 to positive 100 just with one click. So if I click over onto our head, I kind of like it operating this way where it's really easy to mirror the values over, but you do have this alternative where I could zero these out and it's only positive. So right now our noise is outputting from 0 to 100, but we could actually say that the noise is outputting from negative 100 to positive 100. And now it looks like it's doing essentially the exact same motion. Of course, it's offset into the minus range, but I didn't have to put these negative values. I could have just the positive values. Something to keep in mind, again, 90% of the time, I think most people are just going to stick with 0 to 100, but the option is there. Let's mirror these back over so he doesn't look so sad. Boop. And now he's rotating all over the place again. Next up, we've got modify. We'll change that in a second. And then we've got a couple settings here. These are kind of referencing the way these work inside of noise. And if you remember inside of a Cinema 4D noise, which is what's happening right now, we're just passing through in kind of a one-dimensional way a Cinema 4D noise. So if we go and we open up this, I've got one of the old school cinema materials here. If I pause that, then you'll see that we get a little preview. So that's kind of like what noise looks like. And right now, effectively, we have a line in virtual space just traveling across that noise, passing through it. And here you're going to see that we have these very light values. We've got these dark values. And typically, you can see they're all very gray. The whites don't get too white and the blacks don't get too black. Now, you can imagine that the metaphor is sort of this visual noise. So inside of our rocket noise, if we were to grab the min and start pushing it up, it's like we are clamping out the whites. And if we pull down the max, we're making the whole thing brighter. And if we grab brightness, you see these sliders, it's not even playing right now, but I can let's hit play again. And if I grab the brightness and start sliding them up, you see that everything's hanging out more near the top. I can pull it down and it'll be hanging out near the bottom. Honestly, I don't use these sliders very often. They're there if you need them. But the one I do use all the time is this bias slider. And like I was just saying, our noise is hanging out in kind of this middle gray. And you can see that visually represented by this Perlin noise. These little tick marks are not really going up below 25 and they're not going above 75%. They're hanging out right here in this little 50% range. So we're not getting the full range of the noise. So that's what this bias slider will do. It's like increasing the contrast inside of this noise, but in a slightly more controlled way. If I pause this, we'll see that refresh. And now you can see we're actually getting some blacks and whites. But I think that's kind of a harsh contrast where bias is a little bit more of like an ease in, ease out looking thing. So as I increase this, you're going to start seeing our X, Y, and Z are going to be getting to these more extreme values in kind of a smooth way. So just by going up like 10, 15%, or even something like 25 is a number I usually go to, you see that we're going to get to these maximum values a lot more often. Now, you can actually crank this up all the way, but to show that, let's add in this cube and do some positional stuff. Right now, we're using our rocket noise to do rotation, but it can drive anything. So let's drive position on this cube. So right-clicking on the cube, I will add a new field driver, and I don't need this timer. And I'm going to say I want to drive the position, let's say 55, copy down, copy minus, and I'm going to drive it with literally the same noise. So I'll just link that one in. And now you can see we get this nice cube wiggling around. If we have no bias, you see that, once again, it's just kind of floating in this middle ground. It's not changing too much. But if we start increasing the contrast, you can see that we're actually getting closer to that full range of 55 and minus 55. And if we crank the bias slider all the way up, it's going to look maybe a little bit goofy on the head. But you see that the cube is getting to these more extreme values. Let's even increase the speed a little bit. You see how the cube is kind of moving around. If you look at our little tick marks here, that they are hanging out very little in the middle, and they're instead hanging out at 0 and 100% more often. So you get that really heavy contrast. So yeah, I love the bias slider. So like I said, hanging out around 15 or around 25 gives you just enough contrast to actually be kind of pushing up to get the maximized use of the noise as that kind of wiggles around. So right now, I don't need to see that cube. But of course, we can be driving so many different things. But let's actually kind of build this out as a bit of a rig right now. So I'm thinking we've got lots of nice rotation here. I might want to change how much the head is rotating. Maybe I want to look left and right a little bit extra. I want to look up and down a little bit less. And I want to maybe tilt the head a little bit less. And I'll mirror those values to the opposite side. So you can see he's tilting around, but it's not quite as far up and down. So, okay, that's working pretty well. But now I think I would like to crank the speed of this like way up. So now he's going super crazy. Look at all that crazy motion. I would like to, in any field setup, and this could be on a cloner and in an effector, but right now in the field driver, I am going to add another field. I'm going to add, maybe just a little bit of a spoiler, I'm going to add a rocket stop motion. So you can see this is changing the value, and now it looks a little bit stop motion-y. It's only moving every once in a while. So if I scroll down here, you can see that this is only going to update every third frame. I'm going to say I want you to only update every 20th frame. So now you can see that the head is going to pop, 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 pop to these different locations. I'm going to give it some variation. Type that in. We'll explain this all in the dedicated video to the stop motion. But yeah, you can see the head just pop, pop, pop to these different locations. So, right there, that could be a cool animation that you want to have pop. And we're getting so much more functionality out of our noise where now it can just be occasionally updating. But now I'm going to combine this with additional fields. So instead of one of the rocket fields, let's go and use a delay. So now the delay is great in this case because now the delay is doing a smooth transition between an old position and the new position. So because it's only updating every once in a while, now he's kind of smoothly and slowly get his head turning to these new locations. Like, that's really fun. And there was no way to do that type of motion in the past. So I really, really dig being able to layer these types of things up. I've been doing this a lot. So that's a nice smooth delay, but instead, let's change this to spring. So now you can see that the head is going to these new positions and it's really springy. I'm going to lower the effect strength. So you see it's a little bit more of a jitter. It kind of reacts a little more quickly, like wiggle, 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 wiggle. Oh, let's crank up our timeline again. So it wiggles, wiggles, wiggles. I want it to be a little more extreme. So yeah, I'll put this up to like 21. So we get these great kind of big bounces. But I'd like to layer this up even more on top of that. So in this case, why don't we make a new tab inside of our field driver, say new tab, and what do I want to do? Well, I'm going to control rotation again, but I want it to be a little calmer. So I'm going to say like 5, copy it down, copy it left, and let's make a second noise. So I'm going to rename this noise to jitter, just so we're nice and organized. And we could even name this tab to jitter if I wanted to, jitter. So now we know what that one is doing. So we got this extra noise in there. So I want to get the secondary jitter going. So I'm thinking, why don't we crank up our bias pretty high so it's pretty extreme, and I'm going to make the speed again pretty high. So now I've got the secondary layer of jitter. So not only has he got this jiggle going, but he's always got the secondary motion doing this wiggle. Let's go even faster on that. Yeah, now you really see it. Now you see it's jitter, 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 like all over the place. You see our lines wiggling up and down from the big movements, but we're also getting these tiny little jitters. Maybe we don't even need to go too extreme on those. So yeah, the head jittering around. So now we get these big motions with some nice overshoot thanks to the spring, but we're also getting this constant jitter layered up on top of each other. So just by layering up 2 different noises and combining it with different fields, you see how much different power we can unlock here. And even here, if I can't find the perfect jitter, if I can't find like the perfect noise for getting this jitter, or maybe it's too extreme, I could just layer up another field. Again, let's make a delay. And now you can see that that jitter almost entirely went away. It's super smooth now. So I'm going to say, well, okay, I want to smooth out, but not that much. So I can pull it down a little bit. So now you can see definitely still jittering, but not too much. And we can say, okay, let's go a little bit further down. So now he's got the jitter, but we take that really sharp edge off. Or we can change that to spring. So now he's moving these tiny amounts, but that's got some springiness on top of it as well. So layering up fields, very powerful. I love these field modifier layers. Delay and decay, love those. And then we've also got like our stop motion, and soon I'll be explaining weight. So these modifiers have become so powerful lately. So yeah, very happy with the way the head is jiggling around. But of course, this is not just for driving rotation, and it's not just for driving position. It's for driving any parameter or any field, any effector. So opening up a new scene file, we can keep it real simple. Let's just make a sphere and right click. And I would like to add on a field driver. Field driver will be, I should have made noise. I'll just delete that and say, make a random noise. What do I want to drive? I want to drive the radius of the sphere. I'll drop that on there and hit play. And now you see it's nice and gently kind of wiggling around. But I'm going to say, I want a little more extreme here. So why don't we make like a Luca? And Luca is a pretty crazy noise. Now, in general, Luca tends to be in the darker range. You can see it's hanging out pretty low. We could add a little extra bias in there and then add a little bit of brightness so you can see where it's actually kind of calibrated, a little bit more near the center now. And like, look at all this madness, all this quick movement that we're getting. But again, we can layer things on top of it. So why don't I say I want to also maybe, we'll put another delay in there. And actually, no, instead of delay, I'm going to put in a decay. If you haven't played with decay, again, very powerful. decay will find like the largest value and then slowly fade out from it. So if we put this really high, every time it gets to this really high value, it's going to get there and then slowly fade away until it gets pushed up bigger. So we can have that relatively fast, but now you can see we're hitting these peaks and then fading back down. But then this one will probably work well even with that decay. With some more delay, set the spring and it'll make that pretty mild. And now you can see that our crazy Luca noise has been calmed down quite a bit. We're getting a completely different type of motion going. So that can be, that can be pretty exciting. I like the way that all of these different things combine. That is currently driving our radius here, but we can also drive other parameters. If I go into basic, I can say, hey, display an automatic color, and I can drive that as well. And remember, or at least hopefully you watched the field driver training video, if you hold down shift, you can add additional parameters. So now this is controlling the radius and the color. And thanks to this being random on 3 different vectors, you can see that it's going from everything from black to white, and that means every single random possible color. So it's traveling that way. But we could say that, like, no, I don't want this to be randomly doing black to white and all these different axes. I want it to just be traveling along this gradient. So now you can see it is maintaining this black to white, but we could colorize that. I can say load preset and add in the full color rainbow. And now this is randomly passing through these colors. So now randomly, just based on how high up or down, 0%, 100%, it's passing 0% up to 100% through the gradient. But we can go to field and it gets really powerful here. I can turn on the color. So now that's generating color. That's the only thing. It's not being affected by those. So that's the raw color. And you'll see that's just outputting green right now. So it's kind of no color up to green. But even better, we can say, all right, field, you're going to be based on a gradient. So now it should be going from black to white, depending on that color. But let's make that more exciting and feed in a full color range here. So you can see it's now traveling randomly through these colors really extremely. So based on this, when it's down here at 0, it's going to be at 0. And when it's at 100, it's going to be all the way up at 100. So it's kind of going up, down, up, down. But you see, it's really strong. This jitter is like this noise is just so fast that the colors are a little bit too like extreme for me. So what we can do is make another delay. So here's a new delay. And this time I can say, don't affect the value, affect the color. And now you see that's still based off that same color, but it's calmed it down. It's more slowly transitioning through. So we could lower that a little bit so it's going to get sharper, and we could make it go way high up and really slow down that noise. So again, complete kind of chaos from the noise, and then we can wrangle it using different modifiers. So again, love that combination. And finally, you can use noise in any MoGraph type setup. So we can jump over here. I've just got a bunch of these clocks copied all over the place. So let's make a plane field that will push them all up in the air, which is fine. Let's say, yes, they should go up. And then let's also have them spin. So I'll say they'll spin around like that. So right now they're all being applied uniformly, but I can say inside the field, I would like to create a rocket noise. Based on the rocket noise, it is outputting a value and a color. I could get rid of the color, and right now it's just the value. So you see all these randomly rotating and moving up. And as before, we can say, well, we increase the contrast a little bit. If we crank it all the way, you're going to see that they're almost entirely at the top and bottom with just very quick transitions in between. We can lower that back down to something semi-reasonable. And we can push that even further. We could put, springs in there. We could say, okay, fields, let's go and say that there's some stop motion in there. Again, a little bit spoilers, but we can turn on indexed and put some variation on those. And now they all update at slightly different times. So let's put a little extra variation on there, and we'll let those kind of build up their values. And then you can see them popping as they go, which is fun. And let's go and add in a little bit of a delay. So that's going to start slowing them. That's going to start smoothing them back out again. Oh, that's a decay. Sorry. Let's put a delay, and it's going to start smoothing them back out just a little bit. Yeah, look, tick, 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 going up and down. So yeah, super fun there. And of course, we can be driving color. So I can say, okay, this is driving color. None of these are. So I'll make a completely different random noise. This one will drive color and only color via its own gradient. And the gradient I'll feed in will be, scroll down, grab something like rainbow refreshing, some of my presets. So yeah, that looks nice. But you can see that once again, it's hanging out in that middle gray. Look at all these blues. It's like right in that middle. So we just grab that contrast, start increasing it until you can see we actually get some of those yellows and some of those bright pinks. So until we get kind of a nice distribution of all of our colors based on this noise. And there we go. That's looking really nice. Layering those up. So of course, our rocket noise getting applied directly into any kind of cloner setup. There is more to talk about in the future. I look forward to making some tutorials. Like this time offset thing is going to be really fun for making noise progress based on time. But that is definitely a video for another day. For now, I think that's going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye, everybody.